Minister, in this House I often hear people speak about leadership and heroism in relation to ongoing national stories. And indeed, throughout COVID, we heard daily about the sacrifice and the mission in our public sector to save lives and the risks that public sector health workers engaged in. But unlike COVID, the emergency situation that faces our retained firefighters has not abated in any way. And every day they attend duty, they do so in the knowledge that they might ultimately be involved in a serious work-related accident or incident that could demand of them, unknowingly, the ultimate sacrifice. Such a scenario unfolded in 2007 with the loss of 2 firefighters fighting a blaze in a factory complex in Bray. There is nothing to say such a scenario cannot repeat itself on any other workday in any other part of this country. What value, Minister, should we as a society place on this type of service? 2 areas of concern I raised with you recently. One was in relation to the Wexford Hospital fire that Deputy Murphy has alluded to. As I said to you, the first fire crew to respond to that was just a station officer and a driver mechanic. And they had to wait 40 minutes for a fire tender to arrive from Enniscorthy to deal with that fire. And but for the bravery of the hospital staff and their organisation in Wexford, that they had nearly all of the patients evacuated, there was no loss of life. But I'd ask you the question, what discussion might we be having in this House today if we were talking about 40 or 50 lives lost in Wexford fire and the resultant need to have fire engines on site and on scene far sooner? The fire service is very important to rural Ireland, Minister, and indeed in my own county of Waterford we have a large hinterland, as well you know, where the fire service is often the first go-to responder that people will see, even before the ambulance. And people depend on this service very, very firmly. And as other deputies have said, we have retained firefighters who do it certainly not for the money. They do it for the service to their community, and many of them are involved as first responders, as cardiac responders, etc. And, Minister, I think we have to ask ourselves, as Deputy Murphy outlined, we as politicians are well paid, but we want the work to be valued and we want to be recognised for the service that we give. And people who work in the retained fire service are absolutely no different. One of the firefighters in the retained service in County Waterford outlined to me one of his big disappointments was he didn't have a decent uniform. And in actual fact, none of his colleagues had either, nor had they been provided. And he said, you know what, we don't even have a semblance of a formal-looking group when we go to attend a funeral for a colleague or somebody in the service, nor to stand in procession at an event or anything. And I think that's a terrible indictment, to be honest, in terms of a public service role, to say that people there who have such pride in the service at the same time understand that the service doesn't really value them. And I think that's something that we have to clearly look at, Minister. So I would say remuneration is a symbol of the value of work. We'd all agree with that. And the recognition of the work that one does is recognised in the remuneration, that the work means something. And unfortunately, we are giving the message to retained firefighters by the remuneration on offer and by the inability of Deeper and whoever else to look at doing something for retained firefighters, that ultimately we're saying you don't matter. And that is not the case, and it is certainly not the opinion of people where I live. So I note your comments, Minister, earlier regarding the collective bargaining, and I would contend this service has been long left out of an inexorable round of collective bargaining, and for that reason I think you should do something exceptional. I would call on government to do something exceptional in terms of the retained firefighters. I think you have to finally recognise them for what they are and pay them. They are emergency responders, they are first responders, and they need to be supported and remunerated appropriately.